Well, there are no two ways about it. Fentanyl has become one of the biggest killers in this country. Just in King County alone, so far this year, there have been 682 overdose deaths involving fentanyl. That's pretty close to the 712 that happened in King County for all of last year. Now, meth also still there, causing hundreds of overdose deaths and nothing but problems. So I'm joined now by Casey McNerthney with the King County Prosecutor's Office, which has seen a significant increase, close to 40% in terms of the number of drug dealing cases that have been filed to this point compared to this point last year. Casey, what is behind the increase in the filing of these drug dealing cases?
It's two things. It's the focus on fentanyl and trying to address the dealers who are profiting off of people who are addicted, and also the increase in fentanyl. The more overdoses we see, the more fentanyl we see on our street. And I think the public wants to know that prosecutors are filing these cases and will keep filing these cases, which is exactly what's happening in King County.
Now, this is not to detract from the work that the prosecutor's office and prosecutor Lisa Mannion are doing trying to go after these drug dealers. But I mean, we're still seeing such a massive problem out here. Are you even able to make a dent in the broad scope that this drug has, this hold it has on our community?
I think yes and no. In the last few weeks, we've seen two major cases where the King County Prosecutor's Office has worked with law enforcement to get major busts to have, tens of pounds of fentanyl and both in pill and powder form, tens of pounds of meth and heroin. And so when you see busts like that don't always make the news, but are certainly happening, that makes a dent for sure. It's hard though, because fentanyl is about 88 cents per pill to make, and so it's so cheap for the drug dealers to make that you don't see them making bunk drugs like they would for in previous years. And so yes, it's making a difference, and I'm sure that we'd see a much bigger problem if we didn't have King County prosecutors and dedicated law enforcement agencies working the way they are right now, and will keep working. But we also know that there's a lot of drugs that are affecting every major city that is coming in some cases from the cartels, and it seems like it's so cheap and easy for them to make. That's why we've got to stay vigilant about it.
Now, you just used a term there, and I want to make sure I heard you right. Bump drugs, was that right?
Oh, bunk drugs. Yeah. So basically, what, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, what you would see is people making drugs that were fake and passing that off as the actual drugs. Now it's so cheap for dealers to make fentanyl. 88 cents or less per pill is what we've been told, and that's roughly the same cost as what it would cost to make fake drugs. And so, what you have for the dealers is the opportunity to make a drug that's very cheap. But the drawback for everybody is that it's so lethal. You don't need much to kill somebody, and that's the scary part. And what some people have asked is, why is it that some people die from this and some people don't? And that's the scary part about this, is you don't know which drug will kill you. You can have people who use fentanyl pills, blues is what they call them on the street, who can use fentanyl every day for weeks or months. And we've heard of people using it 300 times and have been lucky 300 times, and then really truly lucky. And then you have people who use it once and then they die that day. And so you never know which one is going to do it for you. And that's the scary part of it. One of the many scary things about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, one of the things that I keep thinking about too is, when they're making this mix and making the pills, it's not like a pharmaceutical company where they know the dosage is carefully measured out, or even like mixing a cake mix. You mix
Right.
it thoroughly to make sure it's all even and it's going to bake properly and that sort of thing. And these people aren't taking that kind of care, I'm sure. They're just,
Yep.
mixing it up and they put a certain amount of fentanyl in, and one pill could have just the right amount and the other pill could have enough to kill a horse. I
Yes,
mean, it's
that's
that
exactly right.
bad, isn't it?
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's the scary thing is in in some of these cases, what you see are people who care exclusively about making their money and profiting off of people who are addicted. And you're right, that's very different than the kind of quality control you see from people who may be hooked on things like alcohol, where you know what the quantity is per bottle when you buy it over the counter, or when you get hooked on a pharmaceutical drug to where you know exactly what that dosage is and where it was manufactured.
Well, and people like the Sacklers didn't do us any favors getting people hooked on, prescription opioid drugs, because then once people can't get their hands on them, they're going after these phony fentanyl pills, aren't they?
That's exactly right. And when you see the increase in numbers and people say, it wasn't that bad when I was a kid, the unfortunate reality is when we were kids, we luckily didn't have drugs around us like this. We didn't have these powerful, powerful opiates that are stronger now than they've ever been, and didn't have fentanyl that can kill you with one dose. We never had to worry about that in high school, luckily. We're now, it seems common for high school kids to have Narcan or know someone who does, which can save a life. But these powerful drugs weren't around even just a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, when we were in school, the worst was probably cocaine and heroin. And
Yeah,
crack was getting to be a new thing, and oh my God, the scourge of crack. And we never probably even considered that it could be taken up to such a higher level like fentanyl is. I mean, it's just
yeah,
everywhere, isn't it?
it is, and that's the scary part. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if you're in a big town or a small town. It doesn't matter on your East Coast or West Coast. It's happening, and you're right. Like when we were kids, we had to worry about was the driver sober? That was the biggest, I think, concern for parents. And now you've got, does somebody have Narcan, because you don't know if what your kid uses is that one time that could lead to an overdose. And the sad part is we hear about those cases all the time, and it's not only in a certain community. It is really rich and poor, left and right on the political scale, East Coast, West Coast. This is a scary epidemic that's affecting everybody.
Yeah, and you mentioned kids carrying Narcan. You never know when you're getting a pill if it's fentanyl with trank, and then Narcan doesn't work.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
just it's wild. It's out of control. So you
Yeah.
touched on it a little bit. What's the strategy for the prosecutor's office to keep really trying to take these people down?
Well, I think the focus is, and this is the focus for law enforcement too, is trying as best we can to work collaboratively to reach the biggest dealers. We've seen, and the DEA does a great job with this too. Of, it's one thing to find somebody who has 5 or 10 or 50 blues on the street corner, and it's important to address that too. But I can tell you with certainty that law enforcement is putting tremendous resources towards trying to find the people who are supplying that. And the more we can work together on that with search warrants, which we have, and filing charges, which we have, and going to court to say, when we have someone, this person needs to be held, which makes them more likely to not do it. I mean, really, addressing those people higher up the chain is one of the most important things we can do, because when you can make a stop like that, where you see a car full, luggage bags full of fentanyl, it's hard to argue that that kind of a bust has not saved people.
Agreed. And it's, I know it's beyond the realm of the prosecutor's office, but part of the reality too that we all need to think about is that the feds need to really go after not just Mexico, because it's coming up through the border, being manufactured, like you said, by the cartels down there who are shipping it up. But, we need to pin down China, which is sending the precursor chemicals to Mexico so these drugs can be made there. So it's a far bigger problem that we're dealing with. But I want to bring it back to, I don't want to say it's a smaller problem because it's all part of a large problem. But there's this ongoing sort of controversy in Seattle about creating an ordinance on public drug use to mirror state law. for people, and it's up to the city attorney's office to prosecute those cases. For people who might not understand why they can't just be done by your office and Ms. Mannion and her team, can you tell us why the King County Prosecutor's Office can't start absorbing those cases in the absence of a Seattle law, even though it's on the state books?
Yeah, there's this idea, and there's been some misinformation, not by you, but by others who just believe that this pass the buck really to King County and that we can take up the slack. But state law, which is RCW 39.34.1, is very clear that in incorporated cities like Seattle, it's that city's responsibility to handle their gross misdemeanors. And the only way that they can kick it to the county is if there's a clear contract, and a contract would need to come with resources, because it's no longer a felony crime, and we handled it before the Blake decision in February of 2021. But now it's a gross misdemeanor, and so that means that we would need to increase the number of district court staff. But the district court staff is handling other violent crimes, and that doesn't make sense to do that contract when you have the city attorney's office, who is very good and saying, we have the resources, we have the willingness, we will do it right now. And so it's not that King County prosecutors are just sitting back and saying, hey, we don't want to do it. It's state law has been very clear, and the Attorney General's office in the state has issued two opinions saying that this is the correct interpretation of that law, where the cities are responsible for their own gross misdemeanors. So that's why King County Prosecutor Lisa Mannion has sent multiple notes to the council, the city council, explaining this, saying this is why we have such a great opportunity with the city attorney's office offering these resources and having the willingness to do it. And I don't think anybody wants to repeat the war on drugs, obviously, but we also, it doesn't make sense to allow people who are in the midst of an addiction to go untreated. And that doesn't mean to prosecute every single case, or to not have compassion. I think everybody collectively agrees that there needs to be a reasonable, thoughtful, individual case-to-case approach. And we've heard that from the city attorney's office. They're often characterized as the boogeyman, or like the boogie office. That's not what they're trying to do. From what I've seen, I think they're very clearly trying to find ways to address public safety, to not have people use fentanyl around other people on the buses or on the street corners, so other people are safe with this very deadly drug, but also trying to help people who are in the midst of an addiction who need those recovery services.
Yeah, and just to be clear to one of your points there, King County Metro drivers have been complaining steadily that they are dealing with people that are smoking fentanyl on their buses, and they themselves are getting sick from the fumes. So it's a problem. Now, you mentioned also the idea of individual cases. Both Seattle Municipal Court and the King County Court have programs to help people who come in that are dealing with drug addiction and drug crimes, don't they?
Yeah, and probably the best known example is drug court. So that can be handled at the county misdemeanor level, and and that certainly may be a program with city resources across the state that could be replicated at the city level if those resources are available. But what people forget about drug court is, there's this idea that, oh, that's just, you trying to pass the buck and let people off, almost the same way that when people who get a speeding ticket get that 1 day class where they go and they go, and they check all the boxes, and they sit through the videos, and they get their speeding ticket dismissed. Because a lot of people have that as their only experience with the courts, they think that that's what drug court is like. But it actually is a minimum 10-month program. It was started by Republican Norm Mailing and a Superior Court judge back in 1994. It's a very intensive program, and many people last in it more than 10 months. And right now, since the Blake decision in February of 2021, what that has focused on are lower level crimes where there's a clear nexus that lower level crime, it's a nonviolent, it has to be a nonviolent crime, it has to be a non-sexual crime, where and the person can't have a history of violence. Those lower level crimes, like a lower level theft, a lower level property crime like that, vehicle theft, if it's clearly motivated by a drug addiction, what we'll do is work in that 10-month program. Multiple different resources and agencies will get people to try to not do that. And what we've seen is a decrease in recidivism in those cases. Not everybody succeeds, because that's human nature. You can't get 100%, but it is better than doing nothing. And I think Norm Mailing had the right vision with that in 1994 that has continued. Just earlier this month, there were 5 people that graduated from drug court, and those graduations are pretty special, because you see people who have said, "I'd be dead if I didn't do this. I didn't think that people cared about me or believed in me," and they do. And when you give people that hope back, it really changes their whole outlook.
So you also kind of hinted at it. How successful would you say drug court is?
It really depends on the individual. I think in terms of overall, it's certainly better than the alternative of not providing treatment. We can say that without a doubt. There are people who, like anyone who knows somebody who's gone through recovery, usually it takes a couple times for it to work. And so there are certainly people who need multiple chances. There are some people who are in it the first time and they succeed at the first time. It's a pretty individualized outcome, but guaranteed, what the numbers have shown us for almost 30 years, is that those results are better than just locking somebody up and not giving them the opportunity for treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Because how often do you hear about somebody gets locked up, they get sent to prison, and there's contraband in prison, and they just keep doing the
Yeah,
drugs, and they're
right.
not getting any help, or they come right out and start right back because nobody did anything to help them find a different or a better way.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think
and
I go ahead.
one stat from the Department of Corrections is more than 95% of people with their sentences that are set by state lawmakers in Washington state are expected to get out of prison in their lifetime. And that's the same across different states. That's not unique to Washington. But really what that means is that when you get out, you'll do what you know. So if you have help and support and mentorship to learn a better way, you're more likely to do that better way when you get out. If you're just passing time with your sentence, you're going to get out and go back to exactly what you know, which may be victimizing others and victimizing yourself in the process.
Yep, and that's why we need more of these programs. All right, Casey McNerthney with the King County Prosecutor's Office. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Ryan.